the lemon polish clung to my wrists, bright and sharp, like someone was trying to scrub the truth off me. I leaned over the mahogany dining table that stretched the length of the room, and my back screamed with every pass of the cloth. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago rain tapped a steady beat against the glass, and the city lights blurred into soft halos. Up here, 13 floors above the street, the penthouse always sounded like money holding its breath. For 6 months, I had moved through it like a shadow, touching things I would never own, leaving no trace except a shine. That was the rule. Stay small, stay quiet, stay forgettable. It was the only way a woman like me could survive in a man like Vincent Moretti's world. Mrs. Langford reminded us every morning with her clipboard and her tight mouth, not with threats exactly, but with the kind of expectation that made your lungs shallow. Tomorrow, she'd said, he would have guests, and everything had to look untouched by human need. I kept my eyes down and my thoughts even lower. My uniform hung loose on purpose, the black fabric forgiving enough to hide what was growing beneath it. 5 months along, my body had started telling the truth even when my mouth refused. I pressed a palm to my abdomen whenever I thought no one was looking, a gesture that felt like both prayer and apology. My daughter kicked sometimes, light as a butterfly, as if she already knew how to be invisible too. The only person who knew was my cousin, Maya Carter, back in our small apartment where the stairwell smelled like frying oil and someone else's cigarettes. Maya called it my miracle and my complication, and she looked at me like she could see every risk hovering in the air. I carried my grandmother's silver locket under my collar, the cool oval always resting against my skin, always reminding me that I'd been surviving long before I ever stepped into this tower of glass. When I rubbed my thumb over its worn edge, I could almost hear her voice in my head, telling me strength wasn't about never falling, it was about standing back up. I had fallen 8 months ago, in a ballroom full of chandeliers and charity smiles. I'd been hired to pour drinks, wearing a plain black dress and a practiced grin, and I'd caught a tray before it shattered, earning a moment of applause that felt like sunlight. A man stepped close after that, handsome in a way that made everyone else fade, and he introduced himself with a name that wasn't real. That night I let myself be seen, just once, because he looked at me like I mattered. By morning he was gone, and all I had left was a hotel key card memory and the quiet ache of being fooled by my own hope. 2 weeks later the test turned positive, and a month after that a magazine photo told me who he really was. Vincent Moretti, the philanthropic businessman on glossy paper, and the rumored boss people blamed when stubborn businesses burned or disappeared. I didn't know which version was truer, only that either one could take my baby from me. So I chose hiding in plain sight, the cruelest kind of irony, cleaning his house while praying he'd never notice my face. Most days worked, until today. Mrs. Langford's shoes clicked away down the hall, and I let my breath out slowly, telling myself I was safe for 1 more hour. Then the air changed, like a door had opened somewhere I couldn't see. I looked up and he was there in the doorway, suit sharp, eyes darker than the storm outside, a presence that made the room feel smaller. A security man hovered behind him, but Vincent didn't need backup to feel dangerous. I remembered every rule at once, and still my heart punched against my ribs. His gaze moved over me like he was checking a ledger, and I fought the instinct to cover my stomach. He paused, and in that pause I felt the fragile scaffolding of my plan wobble. I told myself he couldn't recognize me, that the ballroom had been dim, that I was thinner now, that time had blurred me into someone else. But he didn't look past me. He looked right at me, and my name left his mouth like a verdict. Not Hannah the maid, not the quiet pair of hands. Hannah Carter, the person I'd tried to erase. The sound hit my chest and stayed there. I nodded because my body remembered obedience. Even while my mind raced ahead to Maya, to our apartment key, to the bus schedule, to all the places I could still vanish, somewhere behind Vincent's calm, I sensed curiosity sharpening into intention. Tomorrow's guests, Mrs. Langford's tightened schedule. The way I'd been reassigned out of the West Wing, it all clicked into a new shape. If he was paying attention now, nothing about my life would stay accidental. I swallowed the metallic taste of fear and told myself one thing. I had to make it home tonight, because tomorrow I might not get to choose at all. His voice stayed in my ears all the way to the service elevator. Hannah Carter. Not a role, not a uniform, a person. I kept my face blank while my hands finished motions they'd memorized, wiping, folding, returning rags to the cart because panic was a luxury I couldn't afford in that building. The hallway smelled like citrus and expensive wood. When the doors finally closed, I let my shoulders drop a fraction, like a puppet whose strings loosened. Downstairs, The winter air slapped me awake, and I walked fast, head down. I told myself I could disappear if I kept moving. The bus was late, as usual, and the shelter's plastic wall was scratched with old tags and fresh fingerprints. I watched slush crawl along the curb, gray as dishwater, while commuters stared into their phones like prayer books. When the bus sighed to a stop, I climbed aboard and swiped my pass, grateful for the warmth and the anonymity. The route cut from glass towers to blocks of discount stores and shuttered storefronts. Every jolt of the seat reminded me of my belly, of the secret under my coat. I kept one hand near the locket, breathing slow all night. Our building sat wedged between a laundromat and a tiny grocery that sold lottery tickets behind bulletproof glass. The stairwell smelled of frying onions and stale smoke, familiar in a way that softened my chest. Maya opened the door before I'd fully turned the key, like she'd been listening for my steps. She took one look at my face and reached for my coat, steering me toward the couch with the same gentle authority she used on patients at the clinic. She didn't ask first. She just moved, warmed soup, and watched me breathe. I felt 12 again, needing steadiness. Once I'd eaten a few bites, the words spilled out in my head even before they reached my mouth. I told her, in the safest version I could manage, that Vincent had finally looked at me and used my name, as if he'd been collecting it. Maya's eyes flicked to my stomach, then back to my face, and I could feel her calculating escape routes the way I calculated grocery budgets. She wanted me gone, Phoenix, Milwaukee, anywhere but my job carried insurance, and my prenatal appointments were already lined up. Running sounded brave until I pictured missed checkups and empty pockets. While Maya rinsed the bowl, she turned on the TV for background noise, the way we always did to make the apartment feel less small. A local reporter stood in front of a charred storefront, talking about an overnight blaze that investigators called suspicious. The camera panned to neighbors who refused to look straight at the lens, and to a suited spokesperson who offered careful, useless phrases. Nobody said Vincent's name, but the story carried his shadow. Protection, they called it, like a blessing. I sat there, hearing my own heartbeat, wondering how many warnings could fit inside one broadcast. That night I lay awake with my hand over my belly, listening to pipes knock and distant sirens fade. The baby rolled, stubborn and alive, and I promised her what I couldn't guarantee, that I would keep her safe. Morning came in a slate-gray smear over the windows. I rode the early bus back to the tower, shoulders tense, rehearsing my invisibility routine like a spell. In the staff room, the smell of bleach and burnt coffee mixed with the rustle of uniforms. Mrs. Langford waited, clipboard already angled like a weapon. I feel the day narrowing around me. She announced a change of plans with the calm of someone rearranging furniture, not lives. Vincent would be working from home, she said, and the penthouse needed to be perfect. Then she assigned tasks, and when she reached my name, her eyes pinned me in place. I was moved from the quiet corners to the main living areas, the rooms with the long sightlines and the expensive silence. The other maids went still for half a second, the way people do around bad news. Everyone knew being noticed was dangerous. Everyone knew requests from him weren't accidents at all. I cleaned like a machine, dusting shelves that looked untouched, polishing a counter that already reflected my face back at me. My body felt heavier today, or maybe my fear made it that way. Behind a closed office door, men's voices rose and fell in low murmurs, and every so often the sound of a chair scraped like a warning. I kept my gaze on the flowers I was arranging, forcing my breathing to stay even. When the door opened, the air seemed to tighten. Footsteps crossed the room with certainty. I didn't look up to know who it was. My name came again, carried across the space as if it belonged there. I felt every eye in the room turn away on instinct, staff pretending not to hear, pretending not to know what it meant to be called. I held my posture the way Mrs. Langford trained us, hands still, chin neutral. But inside I was counting exits and lies. The request landed with a simple image. Black coffee, no sugar, delivered to his office. It sounded ordinary, polite, and that's what made it terrifying. I was about to be alone with him, and my secret could not slip. By the time I reached Vincent Moretti's office door, the coffee tray felt heavier than silver should. The hallway was too bright, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made my shoes sound guilty. I kept repeating my rules, eyes down, shoulders soft, breathe through the nose, never rush because rushing made you noticeable. Under my uniform, my belly tightened with the slow ache that had become my baseline at 5 months. I told myself it was only coffee, only a task, only a few minutes. Still, my pulse thudded in my throat like a warning drum, counting every step toward the one room I'd avoided for 6 months. Behind it, I could already feel his attention. The door opened after my knock, and the space swallowed me. His office was all clean lines and muted color, as if warmth had been edited out on purpose. A wall of glass framed the skyline, and snow had started to drift down in fat flakes, turning the city into a blurry watercolor. The desk looked carved from dark stone, and everything on it sat at precise angles, pens aligned, papers squared, a single watch resting like a threat. The air smelled faintly of espresso and expensive cologne, but mostly it smelled of nothing, that sterile, controlled nothingness that made my breath seem too loud. I walked in carefully, balancing the tray like it was truth. Vincent sat behind the desk with the windows at his back, turning him into a silhouette with sharp edges. He didn't rise. He didn't have to. His gaze pinned me in place, dark and steady, and I felt it travel over details I'd worked hard to erase. My hands, my face, the slight strain in my posture. It wasn't flirtation. It felt like being measured for a lock. I lowered my eyes to the carpet, pretending focus on the cup while my mind raced through excuses. Maybe he'd seen me in passing. Maybe the gala memory was just a coincidence in his head. Then his attention sharpened, and the room waited. Even the snow froze. I set the tray down with a care that bordered on reverence, keeping my wrists stiff so they wouldn't tremble. The coffee smelled rich, bitter, adult, the opposite of how I felt inside. My uniform tugged at my shoulders, and I silently begged it to hang loose, to hide the curve I couldn't afford him to notice. My daughter shifted, a slow roll that made my skin tighten. I forced myself not to react. I forced myself to stand straight, hands clasped at my sides, as if I was nothing but a tool that had delivered what was requested. When I turned toward the door, relief tried to bloom. Too premature. Almost out. Almost home. My heel caught the edge of a rug I hadn't noticed, and the world tilted. The tray was already behind me, but my body lurched forward with a clumsy momentum that didn't match the polished room. I threw a hand out to steady myself against the wall, and a sharp pain flashed low in my abdomen. It wasn't the normal ache. It was a lightning strike. I sucked in air, and before I could think, my other hand went to my belly, covering it the way I did in the privacy of the apartment, the way I did when I was scared. For half a second, everything stopped, like the office held its breath too. I felt him move before I heard anything. A scrape of chair legs, a shift in air pressure, the predator's interest. When I lifted my eyes, his expression had changed. The vague curiosity was gone. In its place was something colder, like numbers lining up behind his eyes. His gaze fixed on my hand over my stomach, then flicked to my face as if comparing images. I tried to pull my palm away, but my body betrayed me with another stab of discomfort, and my breath hitched. In that hitch, I saw him calculate time, months, nights, that ballroom, the fake name. The room didn't feel minimalist anymore. It felt like a trap that looked clean. He said something then, low and controlled, the kind of question that pretended to be casual while cutting straight through skin. I answered with the safest version of myself. The name on my badge, the work history, the little lies I'd practiced until they sounded like facts. I watched his eyes narrow as if my words were paper he could hold up to light. My thoughts screamed for me to leave, to disappear back into the hallway where other staff could witness my existence. I edged toward the door, fingers reaching for the handle, promising myself I'd call Maya the second I stepped out. The locket under my collar went cold, like a warning again. Vincent moved faster than I expected. Not in a dramatic way, just efficient, like a decision already made. His hand landed against the doorframe beside my head, cutting off the exit without touching me. The message was clear. I wasn't leaving. My stomach flipped, and my daughter kicked once, hard, as if she felt the shift in power. I tasted fear, metallic and dry, and anger rose behind it, hot and useless, aimed at the rug, at my clumsy body, at a world where one slip could erase a life. Outside, security waited. I understood then that my plan had collapsed, and whatever came next would not happen on my schedule, not anymore at all. After I left his office, I didn't collapse. I couldn't. I picked up my rag cart with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking and kept moving, because in that penthouse the only safe emotion was none. I wiped fingerprints from glass that already looked spotless. I straightened cushions no one had sat on. Every time my belly tightened, I pretended it was just a cramp from bending. I kept my eyes on the floor, but I could still feel his attention like a light left on behind a door. Mrs. Langford's clipboard swished past me once, her gaze narrow, as if she had heard the change in the air and approved of it. The other maids avoided looking at my stomach. I avoided looking at anyone. I finished my shift by muscle memory, clocked out, and rode the service elevator down with my jaw clenched so hard it ached. Outside, the city greeted me with wet wind and gray slush, the kind that grabs your shoes and tries to keep you from running. I walked fast toward the bus stop, coat pulled tight, one hand on the locket, and one hand hovering near my belly without touching it, like even comfort was risky. I told myself I would get home, tell Maya, and we would make a plan that didn't involve panic. Halfway down the block, a black SUV rolled up beside me, silent on the wet street. Tinted windows. The world inside it was hidden, and that felt like the point. The rear window slid down just enough to show a man's face, calm and hard at the same time. I recognized him from the edges of Vincent's world, the one who moved first and spoke last. Gabe Rourke didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The message landed in my chest as clearly as a shove. I was coming with them. Not later. Not after the bus. Now. My body offered 3 options in rapid flashes. Run, freeze, fight. Running would last maybe 10 seconds before someone else appeared. And then what? A scene on the sidewalk would end up on someone's phone, and then Maya would be in the story too. Fighting was a joke. I was pregnant, tired, and outnumbered. Freezing would only make them touch me, and I couldn't stand the idea of hands on my stomach. So I did the only thing that felt like protecting my baby. I got in. The door shut with a soft thud that sounded polite, almost gentle, and that made it worse. The cabin smelled like leather and clean metal. Heat fogged the windows, sealing me in my own reflection. Gabe sat across from me, broad shoulders filling the space, saying almost nothing while the driver pulled away from the curb. The city slid past in gray streaks. With every block, I felt the thread to my old life stretch thinner. Maya's warm kitchen light, our couch, my bus pass, my plan. At first, I assumed they were taking me back to the tower, to the penthouse where everything sparkled and nothing belonged to me. But the route changed. We left the dense streets and crossed into quieter neighborhoods, then onto wider roads where houses sat back from the sidewalk like they had secrets. My stomach dropped when the skyline thinned behind us. I didn't ask where we were going. Asking would only make it real. I saw the estate before I understood it. Iron fencing, cameras perched like black birds, a gate that opened without anyone stepping outside. The driveway was long and lined with bare trees, their branches scratching at the sky. Guards stood near the entrance, motionless, as if the house itself was a job. Inside, the air was warm and quiet, and the decor was restrained. Luxury stone, glass, art chosen to impress without revealing a single personal photograph. It felt less like a home than a high-end hotel waiting for a guest who never arrived. Gabe led me to a sitting room and left me alone with a crackling fire and furniture that looked too perfect to be used. My hands kept drifting to my belly, protective now that no one was watching, and my mind ran in circles. Was this a threat? A negotiation? A punishment for lying? I stared at the flames and tried to picture Maya, probably checking her phone, probably pacing, probably sick with worry. The thought made my throat sting. If they contacted her, it would be from a number she couldn't call back. If they didn't, she'd imagine the worst. When Vincent finally appeared, he wasn't in a suit. He wore a dark sweater and slacks, his hair less controlled, as if he'd stepped out of the role I feared and into something quieter. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. He looked at me the way a man looks at a problem he intends to solve. Then he asked, in the most ordinary way, whether I had eaten, as if I were a guest who'd arrived late, not a woman pulled off the street into a gated cage. The question rattled my expectations. I'd braced for shouting, for threats. Instead, I got calm attention, the kind that comes with ownership. And when he told me I was staying tonight, I felt the cage latch shut. Marco dropped me at our building before dawn, and the stairwell smelled like burned toast and old snow. Maya yanked the door open the second my key scraped. Her hands checked my face, my coat, my belly, as if harm could hide in fabric. I shook my head, not fear. Inside our tiny kitchen, she made me sit and pushed crackers toward me, eyes shining with the kind of anger that comes from love. Her whole body begged me to run. Mine ran numbers instead. Insurance cards, clinic appointments, rent, diapers, and the truth that Vincent could reach anywhere fast. By morning, I was back on the bus, because hiding still felt safer than being unemployed. Vincent didn't call, didn't summon, didn't punish. 3 days slid by like ice underfoot. I cleaned, ate, slept, and jumped at elevator dings, unknown numbers, and footsteps stopping outside our door in the dark. Maya started turning the TV down whenever a car slowed outside, as if sound could attract attention. I kept pretending normal, but my body stayed braced. My baby's kicks felt different, sharper, like she was asking why my pulse never settled. I told her we were fine, and hated myself. On the fourth day, Mrs. Langford's face softened the smallest amount when she told me I had a visitor in the staff room. That softness scared me more than her strictness. Gabe Rourke waited there, motionless, and I understood this was not a request, only a schedule set in stone. He conveyed the meeting time with calm precision, 7 in the evening, and my stomach tightened as if the clock itself had hands on me. I nodded because refusing would only make him step closer. Back home, Maya read my expression and started packing like instinct could outrun in power. The car that arrived wasn't the SUV, but a sleek sedan that looked invisible in traffic. I watched Maya in our window, her arms crossed, lips moving in a prayer she wouldn't admit to. Downtown, the building they led me into had no sign, just a plaque and a doorman. Inside, velvet curtains swallowed the restaurant noise and left me in a private alcove with dim light and too much silence. Vincent waited at a small table, composed as ever, but his attention tracked my belly first, like he was confirming a fact. I sat because standing felt like defiance. He surprised me by asking, in a careful way, for permission to touch my stomach. The request landed like a test of whether I still belonged to myself. I hesitated, then guided his hand where the baby was restless. For a beat, nothing happened, and then she kicked his palm. The change on Vincent's face was almost human, like wonder cracked through stone, and it startled something soft in me before I could bury it. Then he shifted, and the warmth vanished. He recited my life like a file. Age, orphaned at 17, grandmother gone, job trail, and Maya's name. Humiliation burned in my cheeks, not because the facts were shameful, but because he owned them. I realized I'd been observed long before he said my name. Anger rose anyway, hot and protective. I pressed my locket and reminded myself my baby was not leverage no matter how much power. Vincent's conclusion arrived like a stamp on paperwork. The child, he implied, was not just mine. She was his heir, and heirs didn't live in bus route apartments. He laid out the future with calm certainty. I would move into his home. The baby would carry his name. 12 noon tomorrow. Refusal lasted a second in my imagination. The next second held Maya's face, apartment door, the clinic we relied on, and the fact he knew it. The menace lived in his calm. My anger burned, but it couldn't change the math. So I changed my posture. I would not plead. In the restroom, I breathed through shaking hands and stared at my reflection until my eyes stopped shining with panic. Back at the table, everything felt decided. The ride home was quiet, city lights smeared by wet windows, and his reminder echoed in my chest. I went home to pack. Maya begged me to leave Chicago that night, to vanish at a friend's place until the baby came. I wanted to say yes. Then the survival math returned. 1 job with insurance, 1 clinic, 1 rent bill, and no safe address Vincent couldn't buy. Distance wasn't protection. It was delay. The silence after that felt staged. I walked to work with my shoulders tight, expecting a car to appear at every corner. No one did. That was worse. It meant he didn't need to rush. It meant my fear was doing his job for him, keeping me obedient without message. At the restaurant, the menu might as well have been blank. I tasted nothing until the baby kicked, and Vincent went still, surprised by something he couldn't buy. I softened. Then he recited my life, and the softness snapped. What he controlled wasn't love. It was information, access, and time. Back home, I watched the clock like it might change its mind. Maya made lists, desperate little plans. I folded thrift store baby clothes, tiny and soft, and felt my throat tighten at the thought of raising a child inside fear. I couldn't stop Vincent. I could decide what he took. Maya waited in the living room, dressed like she'd never slept. My suitcase lay open, and we packed in silence, folding my life into squares. Each zipper sounded like surrender. I pressed my locket, felt the baby roll, and promised her this: I would keep my spine. Noon was coming. At dawn, I folded my life into 1 suitcase, not because it was enough, but because it was all I was allowed to carry. Maya sat on the arm of the couch, her coat still on, as if staying dressed could keep disaster from settling. We didn't cry loudly. We did practical things: matching socks, taping my prenatal paperwork inside the zipper pocket, placing my grandmother's locket in my palm like a key. Maya hugged me once, tight and quick, and I felt her shaking even while she tried to be steady for me. When the car arrived at 12 noon, it felt like a bell I couldn't unhear. I walked down our stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other hovering near my belly without touching it. Maya followed to the landing and stopped, because she knew the rest was beyond her reach. Outside, the sedan waited with its engine purring. The driver opened the door as if I were someone important, and that courtesy made my throat tighten. I slid in, suitcase beside me, and watched my building shrink behind tinted glass. The ride back to downtown Chicago was quiet enough to hear my own thoughts scraping. I kept seeing Vincent's face at that restaurant, the way he made decisions sound like schedules. Traffic moved, horns complained, and winter light flattened everything into gray. When we reached the tower, I expected the service entrance, the side door where I used to slip in unnoticed. Instead, the car stopped at the main curb. The doorman rushed forward, smiling like he'd been waiting, and he greeted me by name. I felt exposed, as if the whole sidewalk could hear my heartbeat. The same lobby that once swallowed me now reflected me in polished stone, and every glance from strangers felt like a spotlight. Gabe Rourke appeared beside me, calm and immovable, and guided me toward a private elevator that opened with a soft chime. The doors closed, sealing us in a mirrored box. I watched my own face look back at me and barely recognized it. Upstairs, the penthouse smelled the same citrus, wood, expensive air, but it felt rearranged around me. Gabe didn't lead me toward the staff hall or the linen closet. He walked me past the rooms I used to clean, and into a corridor I'd only entered when no one was home. A door opened on a suite prepared like a stage set. A sitting room with cream sofas, a bedroom with a wide bed, and a marble bathroom that gleamed like ice. My suitcase sat on the bench as if it belonged there. The closet was already filled, hangers spaced perfectly, maternity dresses and sweaters in my size with tags still attached. Toiletries lined the counter. Unscented lotion, prenatal vitamins, hair products chosen for my color and texture. Even a mug sat in the sitting room with tea I liked, the brand Maya bought when she wanted to spoil me. Comfort should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like someone had read my diary and restocked my life. Mid-afternoon, a knock came without warning, followed by the arrival of Dr. Priya Shah. I hadn't asked for an appointment, but it had been arranged anyway, as neatly as the folded blankets. Doctor, Shah's voice was steady and professional, and her hands were warm when she checked my blood pressure and listened for the heartbeat. The fast, strong rhythm filled the room, and tears slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. Relief, yes, but also fury that even my medical care was now scheduled by someone else. Mrs. Langford hovered at the edge of all of it, appearing and disappearing with the quiet efficiency of someone who ran the entire machine. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer comfort. She simply observed, as if confirming that the plan was working. I realized she had known long before I did that my invisibility was temporary. In her world, secrets weren't private. They were inventory. When she adjusted a vase of lilies in my sitting room, it felt like a seal on a contract. Vincent didn't appear until later, and even then it was brief, like a man stepping into a room to check a lock. He looked tired in a way money couldn't erase, but his control never wavered. He made it clear, through Gabe, through the way the hallway stayed occupied, that I could leave the penthouse whenever I wanted. I would simply never leave alone. Security would follow me everywhere, all the time, no exceptions, and the certainty of that rule hit harder than any raised voice. Tonight I stood at the window where I used to polish fingerprints and watch snow drift over the river. The view was beautiful, and part of me wanted to relax into it. From this side, the penthouse wasn't a workplace. It was a display case. The sheets felt like clouds, the bath smelled like lavender, and none of it belonged to me. Freedom here came with a leash, and I could feel it in silence. If I was to survive, I couldn't be decoration. I needed purpose. Morning in the penthouse arrived without alarms. Light slid through glass, and breakfast appeared as if the kitchen could read my cravings. I ate at the long table while snow brightened the skyline, and Gabe's men kept polite distance that still felt like a fence. Vincent was often gone into meetings, yet his presence lingered in the silence between clinks of silverware. After breakfast, I walked the terrace, then the library, then my suite again, escorted even when I only wanted fresh air. Mrs. Langford floated in and out, adjusting flowers, reminding me I wasn't staff anymore, but also not family. Luxury softened edges, and that scared me. It was too easy to stop fighting and start drifting. Each hour was comfortable and hollow, like distant music behind closed doors. Maya came on the third day, after Gabe cleared it with a few quiet calls. Watching her step out of the elevator with a tote bag and that nurse's scan in her eyes made me both laugh and ache. She checked the corners of the room the way she checked a patient's pulse, noting cameras, exits, and who stood nearest the door. I offered her tea that probably cost more than our groceries, and she held the cup like it might bite. Her presence pulled the penthouse back into proportion. I confessed, in the plainest way I could, that the comfort was starting to numb me, and that numbness felt dangerous. Maya didn't argue. She just sat close, steady, and made me remember who I was before the velvet curtains. After Maya left, the suite felt quieter, like the air had been turned down. I stood in front of the closet full of new clothes, and realized I could disappear in a different way here. Not by being unseen, but by being softened. The baby rolled under my ribs, and I pictured her growing up thinking her mother's job was to smile and accept. That thought woke anger in me, sharp and clean. I had an associate degree, a head for budgets, years of doing survival math in my head. I needed something that belonged to me, not to Vincent's schedule. So I decided that I would ask for work. Real work. If I was going to live inside his name, I would at least earn space within it anyway. I brought it up at breakfast the next morning, when Vincent appeared to drink coffee and review messages. I kept my tone steady, framing it as a need, not a challenge. I wasn't asking to go back to scrubbing floors. I was asking to use my brain. I reminded him in careful terms that I had training and that purpose mattered to my health as much as vitamins did. He listened without interrupting, eyes unreadable, and I braced for refusal dressed up as kindness. Instead, he offered a position tied to his legitimate side, something he mentioned with guarded respect, his mother's charitable foundation. He wanted it reorganized and watched closely. He made it clear I would report upward, but daily decisions could be mine. A door cracked open tonight. Hope didn't come cleanly. It arrived tangled with suspicion, because every gift in this place had strings. I pictured a polite leash made of spreadsheets, a way to keep me busy while keeping me contained. Vincent's offer sounded generous, yet it carried his name, and names like his came with shadows. Still, the outline he gave me made my mind sit up. The foundation, he implied, funded scholarships for kids who couldn't afford college, helped with medical bills for families between paychecks, and offered small business grants in neighborhoods like mine. It supported after-school programs and job training. Those were the kinds of problems Maya and I used to patch with $20 bills and hope. I searched Vincent's face and found only seriousness. No smile, only quiet resolve. That afternoon, a box of folders and a tablet appeared on my desk, as if the penthouse had been waiting for my yes. The first page listed budgets that made my breath catch. Annual totals, program lines, vendor contracts, all clean and auditable. Millions didn't sit in a vague account. They moved through clinics, schools, community centers, and scholarship funds. There were photos of classrooms I recognized from the West Side, grant applications, and thank you notes from parents who sounded like my neighbors. The director's report showed stability but no growth, and I could already see where money leaked into redundancy. My brain lit up the way it used to when Maya and I stretched rent. For the first time in weeks, I felt competence, a spark of relief. By evening, I had outlines for audits, new grant criteria, and a calendar of community visits I wanted to make, even with security trailing. The work didn't solve captivity, but it gave me a spine inside it. When Maya texted asking if I was okay, I answered with something true. I was waking up. I still didn't trust Vincent's motives, and I didn't confuse opportunity with freedom, but I could use this opening to protect people like us. As I read deeper, I noticed the penthouse shifting. Gabe's radio murmurs lasted longer. Doors closed quicker. Staff moved like they were listening for thunder. Vincent stayed in meetings late, and the air carried the taut silence I'd felt before he said my name. Purpose was returning, and so was the storm. The foundation files became my oxygen. I spent mornings mapping where money went, afternoons calling community partners, evenings sketching fixes on yellow pads. I cut duplicate vendors, tightened reporting, and built a new grant lane for single moms who needed childcare to keep a job. I added a medical bridge fund for families waiting on insurance approvals, because I remembered Maya rationing her own groceries to pay a copay. Each decision made my brain feel awake again, like I was finally more than a guarded belly in a room that wasn't truly mine. Vincent noticed without making it sentimental. A folder I left on the breakfast credenza would return with neat notes in the margin, questions that proved he'd actually read it. He approved my first scholarship expansion the same day, and the next morning the finance team treated my emails like orders, not suggestions. Once, passing the library, he paused long enough to watch me work, his expression sharp with something like pride and caution mixed together. It didn't soften the leash, but it reminded me I had leverage, results that could keep me upright. Maya called every night, pretending casual while I heard the worry between her sentences. She asked about food, sleep, the baby's kicks, and whether anyone made me feel unsafe. I told her the truth in pieces. The penthouse was warm, my doctor was excellent, and the doors were never mine. She warned me not to confuse comfort with consent, and I hated how right she sounded. After we hung up, I stared at the city lights and admitted the scariest part. I could almost get used to this, and it made me sick. 2 mornings later, Vincent's mood shifted. He moved through breakfast like he was counting exits, and he let me sense, without explaining details, that a business situation was developing. He might be gone for a few days. Security would tighten, and Gabe would take personal charge of me. The words were delivered as facts, not comfort, yet the room felt colder after. My first fear was obvious. What happens to me and the baby if his enemies get close? Then another fear surprised me, worry for him. I didn't want it, but it landed. The next 4 days stretched long and brittle. Men I didn't know rotated through the hallway. Radios murmured in low tones, then went silent when I entered. Mrs. Langford stopped making small courtesies and started watching like a sentry. Even the chef felt quieter, as if knives could hear. I tried to work, but my body stayed braced. Sleep came in short bursts, and I woke with my hand on my belly every time the elevator dinged. Maya's texts turned more frequent, and I had nothing real to answer, only weak reassurances today. On the 5th night, my appetite vanished, replaced by that metallic taste of waiting. I sat with foundation spreadsheets open, pretending numbers could block fear, while outside the windows snow kept falling like static. Sometime after midnight, I finally slept, and then the penthouse woke me back up. At 1:10 in the morning, voices carried through the hall, urgent, clipped, followed by footsteps that didn't try to be quiet. I pulled on a robe, my hand finding my belly before my eyes were even open. I stepped out and felt the air tighten. Gabe was there, speaking into his phone, and 2 guards moved furniture like they were clearing a path. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. Vincent stepped out, flanked by more men, and he looked different than the man who set my calendar. His face was pale, dark shadows under his eyes, a bruise blooming along his jaw, a small cut near his temple. He held himself stiffly, favoring one side. Relief hit me so hard my knees went soft, and I hated that my first thought was, he came back, alive, still. I moved toward him without thinking, then stopped, because the room belonged to security. Gabe guided me back with a gentle gesture, not touching, just directing. Someone called a doctor, and within minutes a man arrived with a medical bag. All professionalism and no questions. Vincent let himself be examined in the living area, refusing drama, accepting bandages without comment. I stayed on the edge of the scene, burning with helplessness. When Vincent glanced at me, the look carried an instruction. Rest, stay put, trust the system. I obeyed, but sleep wouldn't come. By morning, Vincent sat at the table as if the night hadn't cracked open the penthouse. He wore a sweater instead of a suit, but the bruise was darker, and he moved carefully. The ordinary routine made something snap in me. I realized I couldn't raise a child inside blanks and euphemisms. If danger could reach this home, it could reach my daughter. I deserved to know what I was being protected from, and what my silence was buying. My fear had kept me obedient. Now it was turning into a boundary today. I wasn't asking for romance or forgiveness. I was asking for facts. Because facts were the only ground I could stand on. I could handle ugly truths better than pretty lies. I thought of the foundation kids, the single moms I wanted to help, and the baby moving under my ribs, already tied to Vincent's name. Whatever he called his world business, legacy, protection, there was darkness under it. At breakfast, I decided I would press until I heard an honest answer. If he refused, I'd make my own deal. Truth or nothing from now. Breakfast should have felt ordinary, but nothing in that room was ordinary anymore. Coffee steam curled above the cup like a quiet warning, and every clink of silverware sounded too loud against the glass walls. Vincent Moretti sat across from me in a charcoal sweater, moving carefully, as if his ribs argued with every breath. The bruise on his jaw had deepened overnight, proof that 1:10 in the morning hadn't been a dream. Gabe Rourke stayed near the hall, present, the way a lock is present on a door. I tried to eat. I truly did. But my stomach was a knot. The image of the elevator opening kept replaying, the way the penthouse had filled with urgent footsteps, the way everyone's eyes had gone to Vincent like gravity. I had spent my whole life surviving by accepting what I couldn't change. That morning I understood I couldn't afford that habit anymore. So I drew a line. Quietly. The way you draw lines when you're standing on thin ice. I let Vincent see that I was done swallowing vagueness. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because my child's safety required more than reassurances. I needed the truth, even if it made me dislike him more. Especially if it made me dislike him more. The honesty he offered came in measured pieces, like he was choosing words that wouldn't light the room on fire. He didn't give me names at first, only the shape of the problem. A rival crew pushing where they shouldn't, testing boundaries, trying to make him blink. When I pressed, he let one name slip into the air. The Kincaid crew then tightened again, as if saying it aloud invited it closer. He made it clear that in his world, pressure doesn't arrive as polite letters. It arrives as threats, broken agreements, and people who only respect force. I felt my pulse in my throat. I hated how familiar his explanation sounded, because I'd seen softer versions of it in my neighborhood all my life. The difference was scale. In my world, the bully was a landlord or a man on a corner. In his, the bully came with money, guns I didn't want to picture, and a network that reached into boardrooms. He didn't describe what he'd done, and I didn't ask for details. I didn't want the images. I wanted the consequences. I told him, in the clearest way I could, that I hadn't chosen this. I hadn't chosen his enemies, his rules, his name. I had chosen my baby, yes, but I hadn't chosen the world that came attached to her DNA. I admitted that protection sounded comforting, until I remembered what it cost. Protection could mean walls and guards and silence. It could also mean my daughter growing up learning that fear was normal. I'd spent months terrified of being controlled, and now the question was bigger than me. What kind of childhood was I handing her? Vincent's face tightened, not with anger, but with something closer to regret. He didn't pretend he was innocent. He didn't try to rebrand himself as a misunderstood businessman. He simply let me feel the truth underneath the polish. He had inherited a life built on loyalty and consequence, and he had chosen to master it instead of escaping it. When certain people came for him, he handled them in the only language they understood. Hearing that, even in careful terms, made my skin go cold. Then I asked the question that had been burning since the day he said my name in the kitchen. Would our daughter ever have choices? Or would she inherit a legacy like a collar, beautiful and heavy, attracting danger before she even understood her own last name? Vincent didn't offer a fairy tale. What he offered was a deal, plain and hard. He couldn't rewrite himself overnight, and he wouldn't lie and say violence would vanish from his world tomorrow. But he could promise effort with teeth, shifting money into safer structures, tightening security, cutting certain ties, building legitimate power that didn't rely on fear. He could promise that our daughter would be given options he never had, and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn the right to call himself her father. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness felt like a bridge too far, but something eased inside me anyway, because truth was a ground I could stand on. If we had anything that resembled partnership, it would have to be built on honesty, not comfort. I could live with a hard reality better than a soft lie. After breakfast, Mrs. Langford guided me down a hallway I hadn't entered since I was staff. A door opened, and the air changed. The nursery had been prepared while I argued with my own fear. Soft greens and warm creams, a crib with clean lines, shelves stacked with diapers, tiny blankets, bottles, and a rocking chair positioned by the window like someone had imagined late nights and lullabies. I reached out and ran my fingers along the crib rail. My throat closed. This wasn't about escape anymore. It was about shaping what came next, before time ran out, and time was running out. By the last week of my due date, the penthouse felt like it was holding its breath. The nursery waited behind a half-closed door, soft green walls and a crib that looked too perfect to touch. Dr. Priya Shah came more often, her calm hands and steady eyes measuring time the way nurses do. Even the elevator chime sounded impatient. I kept thinking, a clock can tick quietly and still change everything, and my body was the calendar I trusted. Labor started at 2:30 in the morning, not with drama but with a sharp certainty that woke me from sleep. One wave clenched low in my abdomen, then eased, leaving heat and fear behind. Another followed, closer, and I knew the waiting was over. I sat on the edge of the bed, furious at how much I needed Vincent's emergency system, and relieved that it existed. My finger hit the button anyway. In seconds, footsteps answered like trained thunder. Gabe Rourke appeared first, dressed like he'd never slept, phone already in hand. He moved people with gestures, not noise, and the penthouse shifted into motion around him. A coat was draped over my shoulders, shoes placed near my feet. A clear path opened to the private elevator. I remember the smell of winter air rushing in as we reached the garage, and the dark SUV swallowing me into leather and silence again. Each contraction felt louder than the engine. Chicago streets blurred past tinted glass, streetlights smearing into pale lines while my body worked in waves. At the hospital entrance, everything was ready in a way that made me angry and grateful at once. Dr. Priya Shah met us with clipped efficiency, guiding me through doors that smelled of sanitizer and warmed blankets. Somewhere in the rush, Maya Carter arrived, hair messy, eyes bright with panic, and her presence steadied my breathing more than any monitor could ever. Ours became a strange weather system. Pain rolled in, peaked, then pulled back, leaving me drenched and trembling. I focused on small things, my own breath, the cool cloth on my forehead, the bed rail under my fingers. Vincent stayed beside me the whole time. I noticed how he matched his breathing to mine, how his hand never squeezed too hard, how he looked at the clock only to learn what I needed next, not to escape when fear surged. There were moments I wanted to quit, to crawl out of my own skin and run, even though running was impossible. Maya kept close, rubbing my shoulder between waves, reminding me with her steadiness that my body knew what to do. Nurses moved around us like quiet professionals, and Dr. Shah's voice carried a practiced calm that made the room feel safer. Vincent didn't try to own the moment. He simply held space, as if that was his penance too. When the final stretch came, everything narrowed. The lights, the beeping, the walls, none of it mattered. I felt like I was walking through a tunnel made of muscle and will. Then it broke open with sound. My daughter's first cry, small and fierce, filling the room like a bell. My whole body collapsed into relief. Dr. Shah placed her on my chest, and warmth spread across me as if someone had finally turned the world right side up for us both. She was heavier than I expected, a solid little truth with dark hair damp against her scalp and fists that opened and closed like she was already arguing with life. I memorized her face in seconds. Vincent stood still beside the bed, and the power he carried everywhere else looked useless here. His eyes shone, then overflowed, and the breath he tried to hide made my throat burn. In that instant, I saw the man under the legend raw, terrified, undone. I let myself imagine a different future for 1 second. Then I guided the baby into his arms. His hands, built for control, became careful, almost reverent. He cradled her close, staring as if he might learn how to be good just by looking hard enough. The baby settled, her mouth rooting, her brow smoothing, and I watched Vincent soften around the edges. No threat could have forced that tenderness. It had to be chosen, moment by moment starting today. Names mattered to me because they're the first story we hand a child. I'd rehearsed lists for months, but when she rested on my chest, every option fell away until one stayed. Lucia. Light. It felt like a dare against the darkness around Vincent's name, and the darkness I'd carried alone. I saw him form the sound silently, almost careful. Something in me loosened. Not trust yet. Not forgiveness. Just a promise that our daughter could become more than fear. Later, when Lucia slept in the bassinet, the room quiet, Maya checked my face like she checks patience, looking past bravado for cracks. I admitted I was tired and full, like I'd been emptied out and refilled with something new. I also admitted what I still couldn't label. I didn't know if I loved Vincent. I only knew the idea wasn't impossible anymore, and that scared me. Maya's presence reminded me of one rule. It has to be my choice. I watched Vincent at the window with our daughter in his arms. His shoulders bowed as if he finally understood weight. Power had brought me here, but this moment felt like something else, something that could be built or broken by what he did next. I knew he'd try to offer me a symbol, a ring. The thought didn't soften me, it sharpened me, because a test was coming, whether I could say not yet, and whether he would stay. Postpartum quiet has its own sound, like snow falling inside a room. The hospital lights were dimmed, and Lucia slept in a clear bassinet beside my bed, her tiny breaths lifting the blanket like a tide. My body felt wrecked and holy at the same time, heavy in places I didn't know could ache. Yet my mind stayed awake, scanning corners the way it always had, waiting for rules, footsteps, consequences. Outside the window, Chicago blinked in winter darkness, indifferent and steady. The air smelled of sheets and antiseptic, and I clutched grandmother's locket. Maya came in at dawn, still wearing the same sweatshirt she'd thrown on in panic. She didn't fuss over flowers or polite smiles. She checked my water cup, the monitor cords, the way my hands shook when I tried to sit up. Then she studied my face the way she does at work, looking past the brave parts. I could feel her silent question pressing. Did I feel safe, or just trapped somewhere softer? Her presence grounded me harder than any pillow. I answered in my head first, because truth starts there. with breath. I told her the feelings were stacked, not sorted. Resentment still lived in me, sharp as the first night in that estate when I realized I couldn't leave. Gratitude lived there too, quieter, tied to the fact that Lucia arrived safely and that Dr. Priya Shah treated me like a person, not a bargaining chip. Affection was the most confusing one, because it showed up in flashes I didn't invite. Love, if it ever came, would have to be chosen, not extracted. Maya nodded like she'd heard worse truths in hospital hallways, and waited. Vincent came back later with the careful steps of a man trying not to startle a wild animal. He didn't fill the doorway with authority the way he used to. He paused, eyes flicking to Lucia first, then to me, as if asking permission with his posture. In his hands was a small velvet box, the kind that usually means a decision has already been made. My stomach tightened anyway. Gifts from powerful men can be ropes. I watched his fingers turn the box once, twice, even the air to hold still around us. He set it on the bedside table instead of pushing it into my palm. In that small restraint, I felt the shape of a new possibility. He had been rough with my life, but he was gentle with this moment. I understood from the way his shoulders stayed lowered that he wasn't calling it a proposal. It landed more like a pledge, to be worthy of Lucia, to earn trust he never had the right to demand, to build something only if I wanted it. For the time I felt him waiting for me. I opened the box, and the diamond caught light, like ice. My breath hitched, not because I was impressed, but because I was scared of what it represented. A ring can turn a woman into an announcement. I touched it, then closed the lid. I told him I couldn't wear it now, that I wasn't ready. Not yet. The words tasted like courage and fear at once. I needed him to hear the boundary, not the rejection, and I held gaze steady. Lucia stirred, and the sound reminded me my no had to be safe. For a second, I braced for the old version of him, the one who scheduled my life and called it protection. I expected a tightening in the room, a punishment wrapped in politeness. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if he had prepared himself for this answer. The relief that washed through me was so strong it made my eyes burn. He didn't bargain. He didn't threaten. He simply left the box there, closed, and stayed beside Lucia's bassinet, watching her like she was a prayer he was learning. In that silence, respect felt real. Later, when Maya stepped out to grab coffee, I lay back and listened to the hospital hush. I thought about power, how it can move cars and doors and doctors, but it can't force trust to grow. Trust is slower than fear. It needs time and proof and accountability. Vincent had done terrible things to keep what he called his, including pulling me into his world before I was ready. But in this room, with my daughter sleeping safely, he chose restraint. That choice didn't erase the past. It just opened a door forward. Lucia Moretti lay there like argument against destiny. I ran my thumb over her knuckles and felt the warmth of her skin, and I understood why I'd named her Light. Light isn't the absence of darkness. It's the decision to keep walking when darkness is real. I didn't need a tale. I needed a life where my boundaries mattered, where love was earned and chosen, where my daughter could grow up knowing her mother's no would be honored. Vincent could become that kind of man, or he could lose us. That was the line. By the time we left the hospital, nothing looked fixed. Vincent still had a name. I still had scars from the way he took control. But I also had proof that people can change when the right thing becomes more important than pride. Family isn't perfection. It's accountability. It's boundaries. It's showing up again and again without force. If you've ever had to fight for your voice, I hope my story reminds you that your no matters. And if this touched you, like, share, and comment what choice means to you today and always.